So it took us hours and hours to literally get through one document. It's like, the people would be on the line for 45 minutes, then there'd be a crash, they would leave and then come back. It was a nightmare. So I'm really glad that things have improved to the point that, as you know, Ellen, if the client doesn't have any questions, the signing meeting can take about 10 to 15 minutes or even less, and it's all done.
So thank you so much, Eli, for joining us on our channel. We're really excited to have you here, everybody. This is Eli Angote, and he is the head of the Best Notary, which really is. They really do an amazing job with notarial services. I've known Eli for a while now, and he's the first one who introduced us to remote online notarization. So I wanted to have Eli on our channel to kind of explain what it is, how it works, why it actually does work under California law, and all the goodies. Okay, so Eli, please take it away. When did you first start learning about remote online notarization, and how have you used it in your company?
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Ellen, for having me on here. Thanks for being an early adopter of this very, very cool game-changing technology,
Yes.
which unfortunately California notaries can't quite access until 2030.
Okay,
That's
the time
theoretically the
is
very first
ticking.
date.
Yes,
Yeah.
tick tock.
So yeah. And I think, Ellen, that's the biggest reason why this is so hard for people who are in California to trust that this is going to be a valid way to get their signatures notarized. And essentially, 47 states have passed laws that allow notaries who are in those states to skip the in-person meeting, to skip the paper, and just provide a notarization on video. So I think that is one of the biggest things that I think causes a lot of attorneys to hesitate. They might even tell people that that's not quite legit without necessarily looking at the rules to see what the latest California law is about this particular issue. And as you know, Ellen, there is a law that passed here in California in 2023, SB 696. And I think this is the law that many attorneys haven't quite looked at and read carefully, because this law very specifically says that a California resident or someone who is doing business in California, they can take advantage of a notarization from a notary who is located physically in a different state, which has already passed a law that lets the notaries there do it. So that's essentially, I think, one of the number one things about for attorneys and anybody else who is interested to look up that law to see for themselves what it says about whether it's acceptable to have a person, physically in California. I'm right here sitting in San Mateo, meet with the notary in Missouri or Texas or Nevada, and then have that PDF. There's no paper involved with your remote online notarized transaction. Then have that document be acceptable by anyone in California, whether they're a bank or a hospital or an individual or a business. So I think that's one of the stickiest things about it. And then just to quickly dial back to how we got in back in 2020, an estate planning attorney by the name of Patricia DeFonte was
Our
the first.
lovely mutual friend. Love Patricia.
She's
Hi,
really great.
Patricia. Shout out.
She's great. She's great. And she is fearless and doesn't wait for permissions from anyone to try something new. So I think she was like the Secretary of State's website says, during this pandemic period where it's really hard to meet people face to face, that you can meet a notary who's in Virginia, which is the first state to allow remote online notarization going back in 2011. But then, of course, no one cared about it or wanted to even look at that until the pandemic hit. And at that point, it's a life or death kind of situation. So that is what prompted us to look into the rules, look into the tech at the time, and hack together a solution, which unfortunately, those initial systems were not very reliable. So it took us hours and hours to literally get through one document. It's like, the people would be on the line for 45 minutes, then there'd be a crash, they would leave and then come back. It was a nightmare. So I'm really glad that things have improved to the point that, as you know, Ellen, if the client doesn't have any questions, the signing meeting can take about 10 to 15 minutes or even less, and it's all done.
Very nice. That's awesome. Now, I have some clients who worry about either confidentiality or, is this as good as signing in person? Is it as secure? What would you say to them?
I would say let's zoom out a little bit and look at the tools and systems involved to get to the point that we do have documents ready to be signed. Chances are those documents are coming out of a cloud, kind of a based system, whether it's Wealth Council, whether it's Gapple, whether it's, you name it. A lot of attorneys use software to generate these documents. So starting there, we all, I think, understand that anybody who is handling sensitive information is putting in very serious guardrails around the security to those digital documents. So I think if you look a little closer at the software companies that we trust with our information, whether it's Google, with our email, whether it's Microsoft and the related Microsoft tools, that already we are working within secure digital document environments, and that remote online notarization is simply just another one of those types of tools. A lot of us definitely don't realize that, right? All of our data is housed by a lot of different, credit bureaus. I mean, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. So a lot of that is public data that already exists about us. And the typical estate plan, right, doesn't have that much, for example, let's say medical information, which of course is governed by HIPAA. So I think if the company, the law firm, is using tools that might have a reasonable sort of like threshold of limiting access to only people who need to have access to those documents, then I don't think remote online notarization poses that much more of a risk because the companies that are being utilized to provide the service are held to the same sort of like digital security standards that any of the other tools that people are using are also being held to. So I think it's just the maybe feeling like the people involved perhaps might not be as trustworthy. But I think if you trust a law firm and that if a law firm trusts the vendors that it's working with and vets them, to a level of rigor that gives the law firm confidence in the vendor, whether it's an individual notary or a company like ours, it all comes down to that, what we call a chain of trustity, right? How much do you trust this person? Does their website, seem credible? The tools they're using, tools that also have built-in security safeguards that allow that information to not fall into the wrong hands.
Awesome. Now, I've heard that remote online notarization can actually be considered as more effective or trustworthy because, at least when I did it online to sign something, I had to go through this series of, what address did you live at before and and not everybody can answer that. We actually have some clients who can't pass that test and they have to sign in person. But I feel more secure knowing that, whoever's signing, it really has to be them, right? You need of course, everybody needs the driver's license or a form of ID, but then you have to go through this other way to, to vet the person and make sure that they are who they say they are, right?
Correct. And it goes even beyond that, right? Because when you sign a document from a computer that's on the internet, there's an IP address. That internet connection ties it to a physical location. You can definitely use VPNs, but that also is detectable. So essentially, there's a very, very strong audit trail of exactly who signed each document from where. Sometimes people are signing in different locations, right? We've had cases where someone is in Thailand, someone's in Monterey, California, someone's in like Europe, and they're all signing at the same time for different locations. So it's very possible if somebody was to challenge, that signing or the people who signed it, that we have that on record. So that's, I think, one of the foundations of what makes this better. If you have a piece of paper that was signed by someone, we really can't tell, exactly who signed this beyond we're trying to figure out whether this is an actual signature. So that's one of the top things which separates remote online notarization from a paper notarization. And then there's those two steps of verification. We scan the ID using an AI-powered tool typically, and we're looking at that ID 100 different little points, whether it's the serial number, the photo, the code on it. And this, I think, brings a lot of like additional credibility to the ID proofing system because, a human can look at an ID, but if people, look alike, it'd be really
We
hard
don't know what
sometimes.
to look for, really. I look at a driver's license, I'm like, cool, so it looks good to me.
A lot of, kids like to get those fake IDs to go to the club before they're 21. So there's a whole industry out there, but then it's very easy to detect those when you put them through a system that's been, right, that is, looking at every little pixel on that document. So that is one thing which is great about it. Then the second thing is the what they call knowledge-based authentication that you talk about, which is they plug into sources of public data, whether it's the credit bureaus and other government systems, and then you've got 2 minutes to answer these four questions with an 80% pass rate, right? And some of those questions are so particular and might be grounded in a place you've been for a while. So you might not even remember that if somebody was to ask, but if you see it, I used to live in Michigan. So sometimes when I do a test, KBA, it's an immediate recognition. And somebody who is not you would just not be able to have all your data in front of them to then be able to like quickly look things up and do that, right? As AI proliferates, I think it's going to get a little bit tricky because AI is going to get really good at that. But then the other thing that's good about Ron, Ellen, is that there's a video of you that has to be included as part of the signing meeting. So that's a little harder, I think, to replicate. I'm not saying one day it's not going to be possible, but it's a piece of evidence that is once again adding to the proof that you did this knowingly. Right? You were conscious. We always whenever we do these ceremonies, right? There's a question of what are you signing today, right? Who is your attorney? So all of those things just to make sure that that person has the capacity needed to sign some of these very, very important documents. So those multiple points of sort of like trust but verify, I think is what makes Ron super attractive, even to title companies. First American Title, they told us that we actually prefer when deeds are notarized through Ron. They said that to us.
Nice.
There is less right liability for them because they can present, like as I said, 4 to 5 pieces of documentation from different entities. That's another great thing, right? So you've got use DocuSign for the signing. The zoo has a recording. Ideologies, our KBA vendor. You've got the IP address audit trail on the actual document, the PDF that came out of it. So there's a lot of different ways that it's not all centralized in one entity, which might be compromised. You've got different entities that are all providing a different perspective to provide that judge, to provide that jury with very solid data. This actually happened, and that it's not a bad actor trying to piece together fake pieces of information.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad that most documents that we do in estate planning can be notarized. The one that cannot is the will. Oh, I wish, but no, you gotta sign your will with wet ink in front of an actual person, and someday maybe the probate code will update that, but that's not allowed right now. So do right, got to keep that in mind. But everything else that needs to be notarized, it can be notarized online, right?
Absolutely. We've had a few people, scholars, who, talk about how, some trusts are testamentary trusts. I think most irrevocable trusts are not, or I'm just not aware. So this is just me, kind of piecing together what I've learned. So some people are saying that, well, because, a particular trust could be considered a testamentary trust, that it, kind of qualifies as a sort of a will instrument and therefore cannot be signed electronically. So you're the attorney, so maybe you can speak to that. But besides that, we have, processed thousands of trusts and associated documents, healthcare directors, public attorneys, certifications of trust, assignments of property, and we have had zero pushback except some counties which might not allow electronic reporting. Those might require what they call a papering out process, where the notary prints out the document and then signs off on a certification that this document actually, is a true copy of the PDF. Because with Ron, as you know, there is no wet paper to be signed. So those some counties which allow you to do that without papering out process, and some just say just print out the document and mail it to us and we'll record it. But a few might dig in their heels and say, you just won't do this, even if it's the law. So at that point, you have to kind of weigh your options. You could pursue an action against them to compel them to follow the law. But that may take a while, as you know.
Yeah,
So maybe
no,
cases,
just
well,
sign it again. I know we've
just
run
sign it
into
again.
one big bank. I won't say their names, but they frustrate me. That they won't, they think it might be a testamentary trust and they're not quite sure, so you have to sign in person. And I'm like, yeah, all right, well, we'll just re-sign and sign in person. But what can you do? What can you do?
Yeah, you could always, imply that, this could go to court or, we have good lawyers. So sometimes that gets some people to fold. So you could have to balance, being a little bit, kind of push back against it, but also, think about the implications of, if it's a really, older kind of traditional institution, it might be just best to work around it.
Well, thank you so much for all this information, Eli. I hope that this has put, or I bet it has. I bet this has put a lot of people's minds at ease when they approach remote online notarization. So they know it really is valid. It's good, or sometimes even better than, the original, wet ink signing in front of a person, and you can move forward and enjoy your life. So thanks a bunch, Eli. I appreciate it.
Thank you for, inviting me to chat with you and your audience.
If this video is helpful for you, share it to someone else who might benefit from it.